What he uncovers beneath the collapsed timbers of his family's 200-year-old barn doesn't just change his future, it rewrites American history and puts his quiet farming community at the center of an international sensation. Before we jump back, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jackson Reed stood at the edge of his property, watching dark storm clouds gather over the rolling hills of western Pennsylvania. The biting autumn wind cut through his worn canvas jacket as he surveyed the struggling farmland that had been in his family for 7 generations. Whisper Creek Farm had once been the pride of Crawford County, its fertile soil and innovative farming practices making it the envy of neighboring estates. Now it was just another family operation on the brink of collapse, fighting against the relentless tide of industrial agriculture and economic pressures that had swallowed so many similar farms in the region. The centerpiece of Whisper Creek was its magnificent octagonal barn, built by Jackson's great-great-great-grandfather Caleb Reed in 1824. The unusual 8-sided structure stood as a testament to Quaker ingenuity and craftsmanship, its weathered red cypress siding and distinctive cupola visible for miles across the countryside. Local historical societies had often approached Jackson about preserving the structure, citing its architectural significance, but preservation required money he simply didn't have. "She won't make it through another winter," Jackson muttered to himself, eyeing the pronounced lean that had developed in the barn's eastern wall over the past year. Each Pennsylvania winter had taken its toll on the aging structure, and Jackson had exhausted his resources patching what he could. The last 3 contractors he'd consulted had all delivered the same verdict. The foundation was compromised. The supporting beams were rotting, and a full restoration would cost upwards of $300,000, might as well be $3 million, given his current financial situation. Jackson's grandfather had once told him that the Reed family had farming in their blood, a heritage that stretched back to the earliest days of American independence. The octagonal barn had been just one of many innovative approaches the Reeds had brought to agriculture over the centuries. In the 1950s, Jackson's grandfather had pioneered sustainable crop rotation techniques that had kept the farm thriving while neighbors struggled with depleted soil. His father had developed specialized corn varieties uniquely suited to the region's microclimate, earning recognition from agricultural universities across the Northeast. But Jackson feared he would be the Reed who lost it all. The past decade had brought challenge after challenge: falling grain prices, rising equipment costs, and increased competition from corporate farming operations with seemingly limitless resources. 3 consecutive years of unpredictable weather patterns, likely the result of climate change, had devastated his usual crop yields. The bank had already denied his last 2 loan applications, and the mortgage payments on the remaining 120 acres were 3 months overdue. His daughter Olivia, studying agricultural economics at Cornell University, still spoke optimistically about returning home after graduation to help modernize the farm's operations. She had ambitious plans for organic certification, farm-to-table, partnerships with Pittsburgh restaurants, and developing agritourism opportunities. Jackson couldn't bear to dampen her enthusiasm, but he also couldn't imagine passing on a failing operation burdened with insurmountable debt. The wind picked up, bringing with it the first spattering of raindrops. The Weather Service had warned about this system for days, an unusual autumn supercell that could bring hurricane-force winds to parts of Pennsylvania. Jackson had spent the morning securing what he could around the property, but the barn remained his biggest concern. He'd moved the most essential equipment into the modern steel outbuilding he'd constructed 5 years ago, but the historic barn still contained generations of family history. Antique farming implements, his grandfather's woodworking tools, and countless artifacts that told the story of Whisper Creek Farm. "You heading in, Dad?" called a voice from behind him. Jackson turned to see his son, Ethan, jogging toward him from the farmhouse. At 22, Ethan had his mother's sharp green eyes and the Reed family's characteristic tall, lean build. Unlike his sister, Ethan had chosen to stay home after high school, committing himself to the family operation despite its challenges. His mechanical aptitude had saved them thousands in repair costs over the years, and his quiet determination reminded Jackson of his own father. "Just checking things one last time," Jackson replied, gesturing toward the barn. "I'm worried about that east wall." Ethan followed his gaze, frowning. "I added some temporary supports last week, but with these winds." He trailed off. The implication clear. "Nothing more we can do now," Jackson sighed. "Let's get inside before this really hits." The two men made their way back to the farmhouse, a sturdy 2-story structure built in 1902 after a fire had claimed the original Reed homestead. Jackson's wife, Rebecca, a respected local veterinarian, was already in the kitchen preparing for potential power outages. The counter was lined with filled water containers, battery-powered lanterns, and a transistor radio, a relic from Jackson's childhood that still proved invaluable during rural power cuts. "Barn all squared away?" Rebecca asked, handing each of them a mug of coffee. "As much as it can be," Jackson replied, not meeting her eyes. They both knew what was at stake. The historic barn wasn't just a building, it was the physical embodiment of Reed family heritage. Its loss would be yet another step toward the farm's extinction. The storm hit with a fury that exceeded even the meteorologists' dire predictions. By midnight, the wind howled around the farmhouse with such force that the windows rattled in their frames, despite the preventative tape Jackson had applied. Rain lashed against the siding in horizontal sheets, finding its way through the smallest cracks and crevices. The family gathered in the living room, away from windows, listening to emergency updates on the old radio as the power flickered and eventually failed. "Tornado warning for eastern Crawford County," announced the crackling voice of the Weather Service reporter. "Seeking immediate shelter is advised." The Reeds exchanged grim looks. Their farmhouse had a partial basement, but it was prone to flooding. Still, it was their safest option. "I'll grab the emergency kit," Ethan said, rising from the couch. Just then, a sound cut through the storm's roar, a deep, resonating crack followed by a thunderous crash that seemed to shake the very foundation of the farmhouse. "The barn," Jackson whispered, his face ashen in the lantern light. "Preparing." And narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. No one slept that night. They huddled in the basement until the tornado warning expired, then moved back upstairs, listening to the storm gradually subside in the early hours of the morning. As the first gray light of dawn crept through the windows, Jackson stood at the kitchen window, steeling himself for the devastation he knew awaited outside. The scene that greeted the Reed family as they stepped onto the front porch confirmed their worst fears. The landscape had been transformed overnight, massive trees uprooted, debris scattered across the sodden fields, and where the majestic, octagonal barn had stood for nearly 2 centuries, There was now a chaotic pile of splintered timber and twisted metal. "All those years," Rebecca murmured, slipping her hand into Jackson's. "All that history." Jackson stood frozen, unable to find words. The loss felt physical, like a blow to his chest. 7 generations of Reeds had maintained that barn, each adding their own improvements while preserving its historical integrity. Now it was gone, reduced to rubble in a single night. Ethan was the first to move toward the wreckage, picking his way carefully across the debris-strewn yard. "We should salvage what we can," he called back. "Some of the timber might still be good." Jackson nodded numbly and followed his son. As devastating as the loss was, there was practical work to be done. Insurance would cover only a fraction of the barn's value, but reclaiming usable materials might provide some small compensation. The 2 men worked methodically, shifting smaller pieces of debris and assessing the damage. Rebecca returned to the house to begin making calls to the insurance company and checking on neighboring farms. The morning sun had risen fully when Ethan's shout drew Jackson's attention. His son stood near what had been the center of the barn, staring down at something partially exposed by the collapse. "Dad, you need to see this," Ethan called, his voice carrying an unusual edge. Jackson made his way across the wreckage, careful of protruding nails and splintered wood. When he reached Ethan's side, he followed his son's gaze downward and felt his breath catch in his throat. There, beneath where the barn's central floor had been, was something entirely unexpected. A gleaming metal surface, clearly manufactured and deliberately installed. "What in the world?" Jackson knelt down, brushing away splinters and dirt with his gloved hand. What he uncovered appeared to be a large metal hatch, roughly 6 feet square, made of a dull silver metal that didn't match any farm implementation he'd ever seen. It was secured with an elaborate locking mechanism that looked more suited to a bank vault than a Pennsylvania farm. "Have you ever seen this before?" Ethan asked, crouching beside his father. Jackson shook his head slowly, running his fingers along the edge of the metal panel. "Never, and I've been working this barn since I was younger than you." He sat back on his heels, his mind racing. "Your grandfather never mentioned anything like this. Neither did your great-grandfather, and he told me every story about this place at least 3 times. The 2 men stared at the mysterious hatch, momentarily forgetting the devastating loss of the barn around them. The metal showed remarkably little corrosion for something that must have been installed decades ago, and the craftsmanship was clearly sophisticated. "Could it be some kind of storm shelter?" Ethan suggested, though his tone indicated he didn't believe this explanation himself. "In the middle of a barn," Jackson countered. "And I've never heard of any Reed seeking shelter. Underground." He stood up, mind made up. "Let's clear more of this debris and see if we can open it." For the next 2 hours, father and son worked with renewed energy, clearing the collapsed timbers from around the mysterious hatch. Rebecca joined them after finishing her calls, her expression shifting from sympathy over the barn's loss to bewilderment at their discovery. "It must be from when the barn was first built," she reasoned, examining the hatch. "Some kind of root cellar or cold storage that was covered up during renovations." "That doesn't explain why no one in the family ever mentioned it," Jackson replied. "The Reeds documented everything. There are journals going back to the 1790s in the attic. Something like this would have been recorded." By early afternoon, they had cleared sufficient debris to fully expose the hatch. Up close, it was even more impressive and anomalous. The locking mechanism featured a complex dial with unusual markings that resembled neither numbers nor letters. The metal itself, now cleaned of dirt, had a faint bluish tint unlike any material Jackson recognized from farm equipment or construction. "Should we try to open it?" Ethan asked, voicing the question they were all considering. Jackson hesitated. Years of farming had taught him caution. Unexpected discoveries on rural properties sometimes included dangerous remnants of previous owners' activities, forgotten wells, chemical storage, or unstable structures. But curiosity and a strange sense of purpose overrode his hesitation. "Let's get some tools from the shed," he decided. "Whatever this is, it's part of Reed family history. We have a right to know." The locking mechanism proved more challenging than expected. Using various tools from Ethan's extensive collection, they attempted to manipulate the dial and lever systems without success. It was Rebecca who eventually suggested a more direct approach. The lock might be seized after all. "These years," she pointed out, "what if we try cutting through the hinges instead?" Ethan retrieved his angle grinder from the workshop, and after ensuring the generator was safely positioned away from puddles left by the storm, they began the careful process of cutting through the hatch's heavy hinges. The metal resisted surprisingly well. Several blades dulled before they made significant progress, but by late afternoon they had weakened the hinges enough to attempt levering the hatch open. "Ready?" Jackson asked, positioning a crowbar at the edge, while Ethan and Rebecca stood ready with additional tools. At their nods he applied pressure, feeling the decades-old mechanism resist before suddenly giving way with a sound of escaping air, as if the space below had been sealed until that very moment. The heavy hatch tilted upward, and Jackson carefully lowered it to rest on the muddy ground beside the opening. The three reeds gathered at the edge, peering down into darkness. Ethan directed the beam of a powerful flashlight into the opening, revealing a set of metal rungs embedded in concrete, leading down into what appeared to be a substantial underground space. "It's some kind of bunker," Rebecca whispered, her veterinarian's pragmatism momentarily overtaken by wonder. The air that wafted up from the opening carried a strange clinical scent, not the mustiness they would expect from a long-sealed underground space, but something metallic and almost antiseptic. The beam of Ethan's flashlight couldn't reach the bottom of the shaft, which appeared to descend at least 15 feet before opening into a larger area. "I'm going down," Jackson announced, already moving to retrieve a more powerful light from his truck. "Hold on," Rebecca cautioned, laying a hand on his arm. "We don't know what's down there or how stable it is. Maybe we should call someone first." "Who would we call?" Jackson asked. "It's on our property, under our barn. Whatever's down there belongs to the Reed family." Ethan, who had been studying the opening intently, spoke up. "If we're doing this, we need proper equipment. Let me get some rope, the battery-powered work lights, and we should all wear masks until we know the air is safe." Jackson nodded, recognizing his son's sensible approach. Within half an hour they had assembled appropriate safety gear and secured a rope to their tractor as an anchor. Jackson insisted on being the first to descend, despite Rebecca's concerns about his recent knee surgery. With a flashlight secured to his hard hat and a walkie-talkie clipped to his belt, he began carefully making his way down the metal rungs. The shaft was remarkably well constructed, with no signs of deterioration despite its age. As Jackson neared the bottom, the space opened out into what appeared to be a large chamber. He stepped off the final rung onto a smooth concrete floor and swept his light around, trying to comprehend what he was seeing. "Oh my God," he breathed into the walkie-talkie, his voice barely audible. "Dad, what is it?" Ethan's concerned voice crackled through the device. Jackson struggled to find words as his light revealed the contents of the underground chamber. I don't even know how to describe it. You both need to come down here." One by one, Ethan and Rebecca descended the ladder, each falling silent as they took in the extraordinary space beneath the Reed family barn. The chamber was approximately 40 feet square, its walls and ceiling made of poured concrete, reinforced with what appeared to be steel beams. But it was what filled the space that left them speechless. Along every wall stood metal shelving units holding dozens of carefully labeled wooden crates and metal containers. Workbenches lined with complex equipment occupied the center of the room, machinery unlike anything the Reeds had ever seen, despite their extensive knowledge of agricultural technology. In one corner stood a bank of what resembled early computers, though their designs didn't match any known models from the dawn of computing. Most strikingly, the entire facility appeared to be in pristine condition, as if it had been sealed yesterday rather than decades ago. "What is this place?" Rebecca whispered, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. Jackson moved toward one of the crates, brushing away a thin layer of dust to reveal markings stenciled on its side. The language was English, but the terminology was unfamiliar. Technical jargon interspersed with what appeared to be classified project names and dates from the 1940s. "I think," he said slowly, "we've just found out that the Reed family has been hiding something for generations." Hours passed as the family explored the underground facility, their initial shock giving way to methodical documentation. Using Ethan's smartphone, they photographed the room from every angle, capturing images of equipment labels, document folders, and the numerous crates that lined the walls. None of them suggested opening any containers yet, an unspoken agreement to proceed cautiously with their unprecedented discovery. One section of the facility particularly drew their attention, a desk area containing logbooks and journals, some bearing the Reed family name. Jackson carefully paged through one volume, his expression growing increasingly troubled as he read. "According to this," he finally said, looking up at his wife and son, "my great-grandfather wasn't just a farmer. He was some kind of scientific liaison for a government project during World War II. "What kind of project?" Ethan asked, examining a piece of equipment that resembled a radio, but featured components he couldn't identify. Jackson turned another page in the journal, something called Project Illumination. There are references to experimental energy sources, communications technology, and... He paused, rereading a passage to ensure he hadn't misunderstood. Potential applications for something called non-locality principles. Rebecca, who had been examining a filing cabinet containing folders of technical specifications, joined them at the desk. "These documents have governmental classification markings," she said. "Some are stamped with above top secret and Oversight Committee eyes only. Jackson, I think we've stumbled onto something significant here." "But why would it be under our barn?" Ethan asked the question that had been on all their minds. "And why wouldn't this be part of our family history?" Jackson flipped to the journal's final pages, where the handwriting became more hurried and less structured. "The last entry might explain that," he said, reading aloud. April 18th, 1947. Final directive received. All illumination research to be officially terminated and documentation transferred to new oversight. Maintained installation as instructed for contingency purposes. Official history rewritten. God help us if we've gone too far. The three. Reed stood in silence, the implications settling over them. Their family farm, specifically the octagonal barn that had just been destroyed, had apparently served as cover for a classified government research facility during and after World War II. More significantly, it seemed that Reed family members had been directly involved in whatever research had occurred here, a fact deliberately omitted from the family history passed down through generations. "We need to decide what to do," Rebecca finally said, always the practical one. "This involves government classified material, possibly still under secrecy restrictions." Jackson nodded slowly, looking around at the immaculate facility that had been hidden beneath his property his entire life. "We document everything first," he decided. "Then we contact a lawyer before approaching any authorities. Whatever this is, it's as much Reed family history as it is government property." As evening approached, the family reluctantly prepared to return to the surface, each lost in thoughts about the implications of their discovery. Just as they were gathering their documentation, Ethan called out from a section of shelving they hadn't fully explored. "Dad! Mom! You need to see this!" They joined him before a large metal cabinet that Ethan had managed to open. Inside, unlike the technical equipment and documentation that filled the rest of the facility, were items of a more personal nature. Photographs of Reed family members alongside men in military and scientific attire. Letters bearing both official government seals and personal messages, and most surprisingly, detailed designs for the octagonal barn itself, revealing hidden features specifically engineered to conceal the underground facility. "They weren't just housing this for the government," Ethan said quietly. "Our family was part of whatever happened here." Jackson picked up a photograph showing his great-grandfather standing proudly alongside a group of distinguished-looking men, one of whom he recognized from history books as a renowned physicist of the era. On the back in fading ink was written, "The Illumination Team, Final Phase Implementation, December 1946. History will never know how close we came." "What did they do here?" Rebecca whispered, more to herself than the others. As Jackson carefully returned the photograph to the cabinet, his hand brushed against what appeared to be a small journal wedged behind the other documents. Unlike the official records, this book was bound in worn leather and filled with personal handwriting he recognized as similar to his grandfather's. The first page bore a simple inscription, "For the finder, when the time comes." With trembling hands, Jackson opened to the first entry and began to read aloud. "If you are reading this, then the barn has fallen or been dismantled, revealing what our family has protected for generations. You are now the custodian of a truth that was deemed too dangerous or perhaps too revolutionary for the world of our time. The choice of what to do with this truth now falls to you. Before you decide, you must understand what really happened beneath Whisper Creek Farm and why the Reeds were chosen for this burden and privilege." Jackson closed the journal, meeting the eyes of his wife and son. "I think we need to read this before we do anything else." The others nodded in agreement, and with one last look at the remarkable facility that had remained hidden for over 7 decades, The family gathered their documentation and climbed back to the surface, carrying with them the mysterious journal that promised to explain their family's secret legacy. As night fell over the storm-ravaged farm, the Reeds gathered around their kitchen table, the leather journal placed carefully in the center, like a relic. The discovery had temporarily pushed aside their grief over the barn's destruction and concerns about the farm's financial future. Something much larger now demanded their attention, a mystery that promised to redefine their understanding of not just their family history, but potentially much more. "Should I read it?" Jackson asked, his hand hovering over the journal. Rebecca and Ethan exchanged glances before nodding. Whatever revelations awaited within those pages, they would face them together, as the Reeds had apparently been doing secretly for generations. Jackson opened the journal and began to read, his voice steady despite the extraordinary circumstances. The words of his long-dead relative reached across time, about to reveal why an ordinary Pennsylvania farm family had been entrusted with what was clearly an extraordinary secret, and what responsibility now fell to them as the latest generation of Reeds to uncover the truth beneath the fallen barn. The leather-bound journal felt almost alive in Jackson's hands as he carefully turned its yellowed pages, the handwriting growing more familiar with each entry. It belonged to his grandfather's cousin, Harold Reed, a man mentioned only briefly in family stories as someone who'd gone to work for the government during World War II. The truth, it seemed, was far more extraordinary. Project Illumination began as a wartime necessity, Jackson read aloud, his family hanging on every word. In 1943, as the Manhattan Project pursued atomic weapons, our team was tasked with exploring alternative energy sources and communications technology that might provide strategic advantages without the devastating consequences of nuclear power. The journal described how Harold Reed, a physicist who had grown up on Whisper Creek Farm before pursuing higher education, had been recruited to a classified research initiative that brought together leading scientific minds from across the country. Most surprising was the revelation that the octagonal barn, long celebrated as a testament to Quaker architectural ingenuity, had been specifically designed to house this secret facility. The eight-sided design wasn't just for efficient farm use. Jackson continued reading. The geometry created optimal conditions for the energy field experiments, while the agricultural operation provided perfect cover for the significant power requirements and occasional unusual phenomena that needed explanation. Rebecca and Ethan exchanged glances as Jackson turned another page, revealing detailed technical notes that went well beyond what they'd expect from 1940s science. "What they discovered beneath our farm," Jackson read, his voice growing tense, "began as an effort to develop advanced communications and energy technology, but quickly evolved into something none of us anticipated. By 1945, we had achieved what the scientific establishment would have deemed impossible, a method of energy generation that drew from what our lead scientist called the underlying quantum fabric of reality itself." Ethan leaned forward, his eyes wide. "Are they talking about zero-point energy? That's still theoretical even today." Jackson nodded grimly and continued reading. "What made our discovery both revolutionary and dangerous was its implications. We demonstrated conclusively that localized manipulation of these energy fields could affect not just electrical systems, but potentially the fundamental properties of matter and even time itself. When the war ended, those overseeing the project recognized that such technology, if weaponized or misused, could pose greater threats than even atomic weapons. The journal detailed how, in 1947, as Cold War tensions escalated, a decision was made at the highest governmental levels to officially terminate Project Illumination and relocate most of its documentation to more secure facilities. However, the underground installation at Whisper Creek Farm was maintained, both as contingency storage and because certain aspects of the technology couldn't be safely moved. Our family wasn't just providing cover, Jackson read, reaching the most revealing passage. The Reeds were chosen as permanent custodians because Harold had been instrumental in developing safeguards for the technology. The farm's isolation, combined with the family's generational stability and commitment to the land, made it ideal. Each generation since has had one member quietly informed of the basics, enough to maintain security without risking broader exposure. Jackson looked up, bewildered, but nobody told me the chain was broken. "Keep reading, Dad," Ethan urged, pointing to the next page. "If this journal has been found, it means my contingency plan was necessary," Jackson continued. "I'm writing this in 1978 as my health fails and I recognize a troubling reality. Our family is drifting from the land. The likelihood of Whisper Creek being sold outside the Reed line grows each year. My son shows little interest in farming, and my nephews are pursuing careers elsewhere. I've therefore created this record and sealed the access point in a way that only significant structural work on the barn would reveal it. If you're reading this, you are a Reed who has maintained the connection to this land, and the responsibility now falls to you." The journal's final pages contained technical instructions for maintaining the facility's specialized containment systems, along with warnings about specific stored materials and contact protocols for a governmental oversight entity called Division 7. The last entry was dated April 1979, just weeks before Harold Reed's death, as recorded in the family Bible. "There's a name and phone number here," Jackson said, pointing to the final page. "Dr. Eleanor Winters, Division 7 Assessment Director." "That contact information is over 40 years old," Rebecca pointed out. "Whoever this Dr. Winters was, she's unlikely to still hold that position, if she's even alive." Ethan had been examining the journal's technical details. "Some of these concepts align with theoretical physics I studied in advanced placement classes, but they're describing practical applications that would be revolutionary even by today's standards." Jackson closed the journal, its revelations settling heavily over the kitchen. "So our family farm has been hiding what sounds like potentially world-changing technology for over 7 decades, and I'm supposed to be its designated guardian, except the chain of knowledge was somehow broken." "Your father passed when you were just 18, Rebecca reminded him gently. "Maybe he hadn't been told yet himself, or hadn't had the chance to tell you." Ethan stood up, pacing the kitchen with the restless energy of youth. "Whatever the reason, we know now, and we have to decide what to do about it." The family debated their options late into the night. Rebecca, ever practical, advocated for contacting authorities immediately. The materials were clearly government property and potentially hazardous. Ethan argued passionately for learning more before involving officials, pointing out that once surrendered, they would lose any control over their discovery. Jackson found himself torn between his wife's pragmatism and his son's curiosity. while feeling a growing sense of connection to the generations of Reeds who had apparently been secretly safeguarding this facility. "We need legal protection before we do anything," he finally decided. "I'll call Martin Hayward in the morning." Hayward was a college friend who had become a respected attorney specializing in property law, someone Jackson trusted implicitly. As they prepared for bed that night, the farm eerily quiet, without the familiar presence of the historic barn, Jackson found himself standing at the kitchen window, looking out toward where the metal hatch now lay, partially covered with tarps. They'd arranged for protection from the elements. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like a physical force. His farm was failing. His family legacy apparently far more complex than he'd ever imagined, and now decisions about potentially revolutionary technology rested on his shoulders. "We'll figure this out," Rebecca said softly, appearing beside him and slipping her arm around his waist. "The Reeds have been handling this for generations. We'll find our way through it too." Jackson nodded, drawing strength from her certainty. "Whatever happens, we face it together." Morning brought clear skies and the practical realities of post-storm cleanup. While Rebecca headed to her veterinary practice, emergencies wouldn't wait for family crises. Jackson and Ethan secured the hatch area more thoroughly and began clearing the smaller debris from the barn collapse. They worked mostly in silence, each processing the extraordinary revelations from Harold's journal. Mid-morning, Jackson called Martin Hayward, careful to reveal only that they had discovered something of potential historical and governmental significance during the storm damage. The attorney agreed to drive out from Pittsburgh the following day. As they worked, neighbors began arriving to offer assistance, a rural tradition following natural disasters. Jackson found himself deflecting questions about the unusual metal structure now visible where the barn's foundation had been, describing it vaguely as some kind of old storage system they'd never known about. By mid-afternoon, with additional tarps and plywood concealing the hatch from casual observation, the immediate crisis of exposure seemed managed. That evening, the family gathered again around Harold's journal, examining its contents more methodically. Ethan had created a timeline of Project Illumination activities, while Rebecca compiled a list of potential legal and ethical considerations they faced. Jackson found himself drawn to the more personal aspects of Harold's writings, reflections on the burden of secrecy and his deep connection to the land that had quite literally concealed history-changing discoveries. "Listen to this passage," Jackson said, finding a dog-eared page near the middle of the journal. "The irony does not escape me that as I help develop technology that could transform human civilization, I find myself increasingly drawn to the simplicity of agricultural cycles, planting crops, tending livestock, harvesting what grows through patience and careful stewardship. Perhaps there is wisdom in maintaining this balance. One foot in the future's possibilities, one firmly rooted in the timeless rhythms of the land." "He sounds like you, Dad," Ethan observed with a small smile. "Or maybe I sound like him," Jackson replied thoughtfully. "These perspectives might be part of what made our family suitable custodians in the first place." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching, multiple engines by the sound of it, and moving with purpose rather than the casual pace of neighborly visits. Jackson moved to the window, tension immediately returning to his shoulders. "3 black SUVs coming up the drive," he reported, exchanging alarmed glances with Rebecca and Ethan. government plates. How could they possibly know already? Rebecca asked, quickly gathering the journal and their notes. Ethan's face paled. The photographs I took on my phone, they automatically upload to my cloud storage. If there's any kind of monitoring system for this type of classified material. Jackson moved decisively, years of crisis management as a farmer kicking in. Rebecca, take the journal and go upstairs. Ethan, delete anything you can quickly. Then join me. Outside. Let's not give them any reason to force their way in. By the time Jackson stepped onto the front porch, the vehicles had parked in a semicircle at the end of the driveway. 6 individuals emerged, 4 men and 2 women, all wearing dark suits despite the rural setting and warm weather. They moved with the coordinated precision that instantly identified them as government agents of some kind, though they wore no visible identification. A woman with silver-streaked black hair pulled into a severe bun, separated from the group, approaching the porch while the others maintained positions near their vehicles. She appeared to be in her 60s, with sharp features and alert eyes that assessed the farmhouse, the storm damage, and Jackson himself with clinical efficiency. "Mr. Jackson Reed?" she asked, her voice carrying a faint accent. Jackson couldn't and quite place. "Yes," he confirmed, maintaining his position on the porch. "This is private property. May I ask who you are and what brings you here?" The woman reached into her jacket and produced an identification card with a minimalist design, just a silver emblem, her photograph, and the words Division 7 Administrative Oversight. "My name is Dr. Eliza Winters," she stated, watching Jackson's reaction carefully. "I believe you've recently made a discovery on your property that falls under our jurisdiction." Jackson felt a chill despite the warm afternoon. The surname matched the emergency contact in Harold's journal, Winters, though the first name was different. A relative? Successor? The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. "I'm not sure what you're referring to," he replied cautiously, as Ethan joined him on the porch. "We've had significant storm damage, as you can see." Dr. Winters' expression remained neutral, but her posture shifted slightly, becoming less formal. "Mr. Reed, I understand your caution. I would react similarly in your position. However, I'm not here to confiscate or threaten. Division 7 has been monitoring the Whisper Creek site since its establishment in 1943. We have protocols for precisely this scenario." "What scenario is that?" Ethan asked, his voice steadier than Jackson had expected. "The revelation of Project Illumination to the current Reed generation following structural failure of the primary concealment architecture," she replied with such specificity that Jackson felt his denial crumble. "Or in less technical terms, when the barn finally collapsed and you found what was hidden beneath it." Jackson exchanged glances with his son, making a split-second decision. Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside. The kitchen of the Reed farmhouse had hosted countless family discussions, holiday gatherings, and late-night farm planning sessions over the decades. But never a meeting quite like this. Dr. Winters sat alone at the table, having requested her colleagues remain outside to secure the perimeter, a phrase that did little to ease the family's tension. Rebecca had joined them, the journal noticeably absent from her possession. "I'll be direct," Dr. Winters began, declining offers of coffee or water. "Division 7 is a specialized oversight agency established in 1947 to monitor certain classified Research initiatives deemed too sensitive or ahead of their time for public knowledge. Project Illumination was among the most significant of these. Harold's journal mentioned Division 7, Jackson acknowledged, seeing little point in further denial. But he referenced a Dr. Eleanor Winters. A flicker of emotion crossed the woman's face, so brief it was nearly imperceptible. Eleanor Winters was my mother. She oversaw Project Illumination documentation from 1965 until 1992. I assumed her responsibilities after her retirement. Are we supposed to believe that monitoring our farm is some kind of family business for you, just as farming is for us? Rebecca asked skeptically. Dr. Winters almost smiled. An apt observation, Dr. Reed. There are indeed parallels. Certain oversight roles within Division 7 follow family lines precisely because they require generational continuity and discretion, qualities exemplified by both our families. How did you know we'd found the facility? Ethan asked. The question that had been foremost in their minds. Multiple triggers, Dr. Winters explained. Seismic monitors detected the barn's collapse, satellite imagery confirmed it, and when digital photographs of classified materials began uploading from this location, our automated systems alerted us immediately. She looked pointedly at Ethan, who shifted uncomfortably. So what happens now? Jackson asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. Is this the part where you confiscate everything and swear us to secrecy? Dr. Winters studied him for a moment before responding. That would be the standard procedure for most classified discoveries, yes. But Project Illumination has always operated under special protocols. The Reed family's role was never merely as unwitting hosts, contrary to what you might have concluded from partial information. She reached into her briefcase and removed a sealed envelope, yellowed with age, and placed it on the table. This was prepared by your great-grandfather, Caleb Reed, in conjunction with Harold Reed, to be delivered to the current Reed custodian upon discovery of the facility. Jackson stared at the envelope bearing his name written in unfamiliar handwriting. Why wasn't I told about any of this before the barn collapsed? The succession plan failed, Dr. Winters admitted, showing the first sign of discomfort. Your father, David Reed, was briefed shortly before his unexpected death. He hadn't yet had the opportunity to inform you. By the time we realized the knowledge transfer hadn't occurred, you were struggling to maintain the farm, and intervention might have prompted you to sell the property, the very outcome the arrangement was designed to prevent. The explanation made a painful kind of sense. Jackson's father had died in a farming accident when Jackson was barely out of high school, forcing him to take over operations before he'd completed his agricultural studies. Those had been desperate, overwhelming years, and any approach from mysterious government officials would indeed have seemed like the final straw. With slightly trembling hands, Jackson opened the envelope addressed to him across decades. Inside was a single page of formal text, beneath which appeared two signatures, Caleb Reed and Harold Reed, along with official government seals and witnessed attestations. The Custodial Rights Declaration, Dr. Winters explained as Jackson Reed. It's essentially a contractual acknowledgement that while the technology and research within the facility are government property, the Reed family maintains certain rights as hereditary custodians. Jackson looked up from the document, his expression a mixture of confusion and growing indignation. This says the Reeds are entitled to applicable benefits derived from illumination technologies upon appropriate declassification and implementation. What does that mean exactly? It means, Dr. Winters said carefully, that your family negotiated remarkably favorable terms. When technologies developed through Project Illumination are eventually released for public or commercial use, the Reed family receives both credit for their role and financial considerations equivalent to what we would now call intellectual property rights. Rebecca leaned forward, her scientific mind quickly grasping implications. Are you saying that some of this technology has already been released? Several derivative technologies, yes. Certain energy efficiency principles, specialized communications, applications, materials science advancements. Dr. Winters reached into her briefcase again and produced a slim folder. This contains documentation of the trust established for the Reed family's benefit from those implementations. It has been accumulating since 1985, awaiting claim by the designated custodian once succession knowledge was confirmed. Jackson accepted the folder with growing bewilderment. Inside were financial statements from a trust managed by an entity called Illumination Applications Holdings. The most recent statement showed a balance that momentarily robbed him of breath, just over $27 million. This can't be real, he whispered, passing the statement to Rebecca, whose eyes widened. I assure you it's quite real, Mr. Reed, Dr. Winters replied, and it represents only the minor applications deemed safe for controlled release. The more significant technologies remain secured and monitored. Ethan, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. What exactly did they discover? Down there, what was Project Illumination really working on? Dr. Winters' expression became more measured. That's a complex question requiring significant scientific background to fully comprehend. The simplest explanation is that they discovered methods of energy generation and manipulation that fundamentally challenged our understanding of physical limitations. Technologies that could, if misused, cause significant harm, but if properly implemented, could transform human civilization. Why keep it hidden for over 70 years? Jackson asked, still struggling to process the financial revelation. Precisely because of its transformative potential, Dr. Winters explained. History demonstrates that technological revolutions, introduced too rapidly, often create more harm than benefit. The Manhattan Project scientists themselves argued for careful control of atomic energy. Project Illumination took that principle further, planning for generational implementation rather than immediate deployment. Rebecca, ever the pragmatist, brought the conversation back to immediate concerns. What happens to the facility now that it's been exposed? The barn is destroyed. That's partially why I'm here, Dr. Winters acknowledged. We need to secure the technology and establish appropriate containment until more permanent arrangements can be made. However, she added, seeing Jackson's expression harden, those arrangements should properly be made in consultation with the Reed family as recognized custodians. Jackson set down the financial documents, his farmer's practicality reasserting itself despite the extraordinary circumstances. Let me make sure I understand correctly. My family has been secretly hosting revolutionary technology for 7 decades. We have legal rights to both the custodial role and financial benefits from its applications. And now that I've discovered it, you want my cooperation in securing it again? That's an accurate summary, Dr. Winters confirmed. And if I decided to go public with all of this instead? The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as Dr. Winter's expression shifted subtly. While the custodial rights declaration provides your family with significant privileges, it also entails responsibilities, including confidentiality requirements that carry substantial legal penalties if violated. More importantly, premature exposure of certain illumination technologies could have far-reaching negative consequences that I believe neither you nor your family would wish to precipitate. The implied threat was clear, yet somehow Jackson sensed it came more from genuine concern than governmental heavy-handedness. He glanced at Rebecca and Ethan, seeing in their expressions the same tumult of emotions he felt: suspicion, fascination, and the weight of unexpected responsibility. "We'll need time to discuss this privately," he finally said. Dr. Winters nodded, rising from the table. "Of course. My team will establish a temporary security perimeter around the facility entrance. We've prepared appropriate cover explanations regarding hazardous material assessment following storm damage. I'll return tomorrow morning for your decision regarding next steps." She placed a business card on the table. "Should you need to reach me before then?" As she moved toward the door, she paused, her formal demeanor softening slightly. "Mr. Reed, I've monitored this site and your family for over 20 years. I observed your struggles to maintain this farm against mounting pressures, just as I observed your great-grandfather and grandfather do the same during previous agricultural crises. The Reed commitment to this land has never been merely about farming, though you couldn't have known that until now. Whatever you decide, that legacy of stewardship deserves recognition." With those unexpected words, she departed, leaving the Reed family alone with revelations that had transformed their understanding of not just their history, but potentially their future as well. As the black SUVs moved down the driveway, various government personnel now deploying equipment around the exposed hatch, Jackson turned to his wife and son, the weight of generations seeming to press down upon his shoulders. "What do we do now?" he asked quietly. Ethan looked uncharacteristically solemn. "I think we need to understand exactly what's down there before we decide anything." Rebecca nodded in agreement, her practical nature asserting itself. "And we need to verify independently everything she's told us. If that trust fund actually exists, then the farm's financial problems would be solved instantly." Jackson finished her thought, the implications still difficult to grasp. But at what cost? What are we really agreeing to become custodians of? Outside the window, the first hints of sunset painted the storm-damaged landscape in golden hues. Where the historic octagonal barn had stood for nearly 2 centuries, government agents now erected temporary structures around the entrance to a facility that apparently contained technology still considered revolutionary 3 generations after its discovery. Jackson Reed, 7th-generation farmer and newly revealed custodian of secrets he was only beginning to comprehend, watched as the day's final light illuminated his family's land that had been safeguarding far more than agricultural traditions since before his birth. Whatever they decided in the coming days would shape not only the Reed family's future, but potentially much more. "We should examine Harold's journal again," he said finally, turning back to his family. "There might be guidance there that we missed on first reading, something to help us understand what our family really committed to all those years ago." As night fell over Whisper Creek Farm, 3 generations of Reed family determination converged in Jackson's thoughts. his great-grandfather and Harold, making a momentous decision to become custodians of world-changing discoveries. His grandfather and father maintaining that commitment even as agricultural challenges mounted, and now himself standing at a crossroads that would determine whether that legacy continued. With renewed purpose, he rejoined his family at the kitchen table, ready to delve deeper into the extraordinary responsibility that had quite literally been beneath their feet all along. Dawn broke over Whisper Creek Farm with the peculiar clarity that often follows devastating storms. Jackson stood on his front porch, coffee mug warming his hands against the early autumn chill, watching government personnel efficiently establishing a perimeter around the exposed facility entrance. They had worked through the night, erecting temporary structures that resembled environmental containment units, a believable cover story for curious neighbors in a region where coal mining had left legacy pollution concerns. The events of the previous day felt dreamlike in the morning light. The discovery of an advanced underground facility, revelations about his family's secret role, and the staggering financial implications of the trust fund Dr. Winters had disclosed. Yet the activity around his collapsed barn provided undeniable proof that his world had fundamentally changed. "They're bringing in more equipment," Ethan observed, joining his father on the porch with his own steaming mug. Despite the chaos, they maintained the farm's daily rhythms. Coffee at sunrise had been a Reed tradition for generations. "Dr. Winters said they'd secure the site," Jackson replied, studying the systematic operation unfolding across his property. "They certainly seem to know what they're doing." "They've had 70 years to plan for this moment," Ethan pointed out. "The real question is whether we trust them." The kitchen door opened behind them as Rebecca emerged, already dressed for her veterinary practice, but clearly having no intention of leaving for work just yet. "I've been making some calls," she announced, her tone indicating discoveries of her own. Inside, spread across the kitchen table, lay printouts of information Rebecca had gathered overnight. Always methodical, she had approached their situation, like a research project, leveraging professional contacts and databases normally used for veterinary medicine. "Division 7 exists," she confirmed, pointing to redacted government documents obtained through academic research portals. "It's mentioned in declassified materials related to various post-war scientific oversight committees, though details are sparse. And the Illumination Applications Holdings that manages the trust is registered as a legitimate financial entity, though its ownership structure is complex." "You found all this overnight?" Jackson asked, impressed but not surprised by his wife's thoroughness. Rebecca smiled grimly. "I called in some favors from a college friend who works in financial compliance. She couldn't tell me much about the trust itself without violating regulations, but confirmed it's a properly registered entity with appropriate governmental oversight. It's real, Jackson." Ethan had been examining Harold's journal more carefully, cross-referencing technical descriptions with current scientific literature using his laptop. Some of what Harold describes aligns with theoretical physics concepts that weren't formally proposed until decades later, he reported. Either he was decades ahead of mainstream science, or what? Jackson prompted when his son hesitated. Or they discovered something that fundamentally changed their understanding of physical principles, Ethan finished, his expression both troubled and fascinated. "Dad, if even half of what's described here is accurate, the technology beneath our farm could revolutionize energy production, materials science, possibly even medicine. The family's discussion was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching. Not the government. SUVs this time, but a familiar pickup truck belonging to Martin Hayward, the attorney Jackson had contacted. Alongside it drove the local sheriff's cruiser, an unexpected and concerning addition. "Did you tell Martin about the government presence?" Rebecca asked quickly. Jackson shook his head. "Just that we'd found something potentially significant during the storm damage." Martin Hayward, a tall man with prematurely silver hair and the weathered complexion of someone who spent weekends sailing, emerged from his truck, looking uncharacteristically concerned. Sheriff Donovan, a lifelong local with whom Jackson had attended high school, approached alongside him, his expression equally troubled. "Jackson," Martin called, gesturing toward the government operation. "What exactly is going on here?" "Sheriff, Donovan contacted me on my way over, saying the County Emergency Management Office received notification of a federal environmental containment operation on your property without any local coordination." Before Jackson could formulate a response, Dr. Winters appeared from among the temporary structures, moving purposefully toward the gathering on the porch. Her timing seemed deliberate, her expression composed as she assessed the new arrivals. "Mr. Hayward, Sheriff Donovan," she greeted them by name without introduction, immediately confirming the Reed family's suspicions about the extent of Division 7's monitoring. "I'm Dr. Eliza Winters, Environmental Hazard Assessment Director. We're conducting a specialized containment operation following the discovery of potentially sensitive materials during the structural collapse." Sheriff Donovan's posture stiffened at her approach. "Ma'am, we have protocols for environmental incidents in this county. My office should have been notified immediately, not through automated federal channels." "You're absolutely right, Sheriff," Dr. Winters conceded with diplomatic smoothness. "The urgency of the situation led to procedural oversights in our communication chain. I'd be happy to brief you fully on our preliminary findings and safety measures." Martin Hayward, ever the shrewd attorney, observed the exchange with narrowed eyes. "And what agency did you say you represent, Dr. Winters?" "Division 7 Environmental Response," she replied, without hesitation, producing credentials that appeared both official and deliberately vague. The negotiation that followed, on the Reed's front porch, demonstrated Dr. Winters' remarkable skill at bureaucratic management. Within 20 minutes, she had provided Sheriff Donovan with sufficient documentation to satisfy his immediate concerns, promised coordinated briefings moving forward, and suggested that his expertise would be valuable for community relations. During the operation, the sheriff departed with reluctant acceptance, if not complete satisfaction. Martin Hayward proved more challenging. "I'd like to speak with my clients privately," he insisted after the sheriff's departure. "Whatever's happening here clearly involves their property rights." Dr. Winters nodded respectfully. "Of course. Mr. Reed, I'll be available when you're ready to continue our discussion from yesterday." With that diplomatic withdrawal, she returned to the containment operation, leaving the family alone with their attorney. Inside the farmhouse, Martin Hayward listened with increasing astonishment as Jackson outlined the situation, the underground facility, the family's historical connection to Project Illumination, and the trust fund allegedly established for their benefit. When Jackson finished, the attorney sat in stunned silence before carefully choosing his words. "In 23 years of legal practice, this is unprecedented," he finally said. "If verified, the implications for your family are extraordinary. But the complications are equally significant. Historical classified research, governmental oversight entities operating with minimal public footprint, multi-generational trust arrangements. Each element presents unique legal considerations. Can they simply take control of our property like this? Rebecca asked, gesturing toward the operation visible through the window. Martin frowned thoughtfully. Under normal circumstances, absolutely not. But national security provisions create exceptions to standard property rights. What interests me most is this custodial rights declaration. If authenticated, it suggests your family negotiated terms that specifically protect against complete governmental appropriation. So what do we do? Jackson asked, the question that had dominated his thoughts since the discovery. First, we verify everything independently, Martin advised. I have contacts who can discreetly authenticate the trust's existence and legal standing without raising flags. Second, we need to understand exactly what this custodial role entails before you commit to anything. And third, he added with particular emphasis, we ensure that whatever happens, Whisper Creek Farm remains under Reed family control. As Martin departed with copies of the documentation, promising expedited research into their situation, Jackson felt the first stirrings of cautious optimism. Having a trusted legal expert acknowledge the potential legitimacy of their extraordinary situation made it seem less overwhelming, more manageable despite its scale. I think it's time we spoke with Dr. Winters again, he told Rebecca and Ethan, after Martin's departure. But first, I want to see more of what's actually in that facility. If we're making decisions about its future, we need to understand what we're dealing with. And Dr. Winters received their request to re-examine the underground facility with approval rather than resistance. I was hoping you'd ask, she admitted as they approached the entrance, now protected by a temporary structure resembling a research tent. Proper custodianship requires informed understanding. The government team had established lighting throughout the underground chamber, revealing details they'd missed during their initial exploration. With Dr. Winters as their guide, the facility's true nature began to emerge more clearly. Project Illumination began with conventional research goals, she explained as they toured sections dedicated to communications technology, developing more secure transmission methods, energy-efficient power sources, and similar practical applications that might provide military advantages. But in 1944, they experienced what the records neutrally call the event, a breakthrough that fundamentally altered the project's direction. She led them to a sealed section they hadn't explored previously, entering a code on a keypad that appeared to have been recently installed. The heavy door swung open to reveal what resembled a laboratory centered around a circular platform approximately 10 feet in diameter, surrounded by equipment that merged recognizable scientific instruments with utterly unfamiliar components. This is the primary illumination apparatus, Dr. Winters explained, her tone shifting to one of carefully controlled reverence. The technological heart of the entire project. Ethan moved closer, his scientific curiosity overriding caution. What does it do? Dr. Winters considered the question before answering with measured precision. The simplest explanation is that it generates an energy field that alters certain fundamental properties within its influence radius. The project documentation describes it as localized physical parameter adjustment, but that hardly captures its significance. "In plain English, please," Jackson requested, struggling to follow the technical description. "It can modify how energy, and to some extent matter, behaves within its field," she clarified. "The applications range from power generation that violates conventional efficiency limitations to materials with properties that should be theoretically impossible." Rebecca, whose veterinary background included substantial scientific training, grasped the implications quickly. That would revolutionize virtually every field of science and technology. "Precisely why it remains classified," Dr. Winters confirmed. "Imagine introducing such capabilities in the midst of the Cold War, or during periods of international tension since then." The destabilizing potential was deemed too significant, regardless of the potential benefits. As they continued exploring, Jackson found himself drawing connections between the facility's contents and subtle elements of Reed family farming practices. Energy-efficient systems his grandfather had implemented that neighbors could never quite replicate. Crop yields that remained strong even during poor growing seasons. Livestock that demonstrated unusual health longevity. The Reed farm's reputation for agricultural excellence suddenly appeared in a new light. "My grandfather's innovations," he began tentatively, "the specialized crop rotations, the water management systems, were they derived from this technology?" Dr. Winters nodded, seeming pleased by his perception. "Carefully controlled applications. Yes, beneficial implementations that wouldn't attract undue attention. Your grandfather was particularly skilled at adapting illumination principles to agricultural use. Those techniques are part of what the trust compensates your family for." The tour concluded in a section containing personal effects, the area they had discovered just before the government's arrival. Here, Dr. Winters allowed them to explore, more independently, recognizing the sensitivity of family history. Among the photographs and letters, Jackson discovered a framed quotation in his great-grandfather's handwriting, words that resonated deeply in his current circumstances. "To safeguard extraordinary knowledge until humanity's wisdom catches up with its cleverness is perhaps the greatest service one can render to future generations. In farming as in life, timing determines whether a seed flourishes or fails." As they returned to the surface, emerging into afternoon sunlight, Jackson felt a profound shift in his perspective. What had initially seemed an intrusion of government secrecy into his family legacy now appeared as an integral part of that very heritage, a responsibility the Reeds had consciously accepted generations ago. "I need to discuss next steps with my family," he told Dr. Winters as they reached the farmhouse. "But I'm beginning to understand why the Reeds accepted this custodial role." Dr. Winters's normally composed expression softened slightly. "Your family was chosen not just for this land's geographical advantages, but for qualities that have proven remarkably consistent across generations: practical wisdom, discretion, and the ability to balance innovation with respect for natural processes. Those same qualities will be essential in determining the path forward." That evening, after Dr. Winters departed with a promise to return the following day, the Reed family gathered to make decisions that would shape not just their future, but potentially much more. The kitchen table, where so many farm decisions had been made over decades, seemed an appropriately humble setting for discussions of such magnitude. If we accept this custodial role officially, Jackson began, we're committing to something far beyond conventional farming. Rebecca, who had spent the afternoon researching the trust fund's structure through Martin's professional contacts, spread financial documents before them. The trust is legitimate. Martin's banking contact confirmed it's been professionally managed for decades, with consistent deposits correlated to various technology implementations. $27 million, Jackson. It would secure Whisper Creek for generations. But it's not just about the money, Ethan added, his youthful face serious beyond his years. We'd be responsible for technology that could change the world, for better or worse. That's a moral responsibility as much as a practical one. Jackson nodded, feeling the weight of the decision. I keep thinking about that quote from my great-grandfather, about safeguarding knowledge until humanity is ready for it. There's wisdom there that goes beyond scientific advancement. So what do we do? Rebecca asked, the practical question that had become their refrain. Jackson considered everything they'd learned, the facility's contents, the family's historical involvement, the carefully structured arrangements that had preserved both governmental oversight and Reed family autonomy across decades. I think, he said slowly, we honor our family's commitment. We become the official custodians, as the previous generations intended. But we do it with our eyes open, with legal protections in place, and with a clear understanding that our responsibility is to both preserve this technology and help determine when the world is ready for aspects of it. Rebecca reached across the table to take his hand. You're talking about more than just maintaining a secret, Jackson. You're suggesting we actively engage with these decisions. That's exactly what I'm suggesting, he confirmed. The Reeds weren't passive guardians. They were partners in this process, applying aspects of the technology to agriculture in controlled ways. If we accept this role, we should embrace it fully, as they did. Ethan, who had been unusually contemplative, finally spoke up. I've been thinking about my future. I always assumed I'd work the farm for a few years, then probably leave for other opportunities. But this... He gestured toward the window, beyond which the secured facility entrance was visible. This changes everything. This is a legacy worth committing to. The simple statement from his son, who had always seemed ambivalent about his agricultural heritage, struck Jackson deeply. Beyond financial security or scientific significance, perhaps the most valuable aspect of their discovery was this: renewed sense of purpose and connection to their land. The following morning, Jackson called Dr. Winters to arrange a formal meeting. Martin Hayward would attend as their legal representative, and Jackson requested that whatever Division 7 officials held decision-making authority should be present as well. I can arrange that, Dr. Winters confirmed, her tone suggesting approval of his approach. There are aspects of the custodial arrangement that would benefit from updating for contemporary circumstances. The meeting, scheduled for that afternoon, would bring together governmental authority and Reed family determination in a negotiation that would establish the framework for Whisper Creek Farm's future. As he hung up the phone, Jackson felt an unexpected sense of clarity, a farmer's practical certainty about the path forward, despite its extraordinary nature. Whatever happens in that meeting, he told Rebecca and Ethan as they prepared, we negotiate as equal partners, not as civilians, being managed by government authorities. That's the precedent our family established from the beginning, and will maintain it." When Dr. Winters returned, she brought with her 2 additional representatives, a distinguished older man introduced simply as the director, whose authority was evident despite his understated presence, and a younger woman identified as Dr. Chen, the scientific assessment lead for Division 7's illumination oversight. Martin Hayward arrived simultaneously, bringing with him notarized documentation confirming the trust's legitimacy and legal frameworks that would protect the Reed family's interests moving forward. His normally affable expression had been replaced by professional determination, the seasoned attorney prepared to advocate forcefully for his clients. They gathered around the dining room table rather than the kitchen, a subtle elevation of the setting's formality that seemed appropriate. For the occasion, Jackson, dressed in what Rebecca teasingly called his banker meeting clothes, opened the discussion with directness characteristic of generations of Reed farmers. "My family has considered the situation carefully," he began, meeting the director's measured gaze. "We're prepared to formally accept the custodial role established by our predecessors, with certain conditions appropriate to current circumstances." Rather than resistance, his assertiveness was met with what appeared to be approval from the governmental representatives. The director nodded thoughtfully, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone accustomed to historical perspective. "The Reed family's continued involvement has always been the preferred outcome," he acknowledged. "The alternative contingencies are significantly less optimal for all concerned. However, contemporary security considerations necessitate certain adjustments to the original arrangements." What followed was a negotiation remarkable for its balance between governmental authority and family rights. Martin Hayward proved his worth repeatedly, identifying legal protections and clarifications that would serve the Reeds' interests. Dr. Chen provided technical context for security requirements, while Dr. Winters facilitated with the diplomatic skill that seemed her particular talent. By early evening, they had established a framework that honored the original custodial arrangement while adapting it for modern realities. The key provisions reflected both the gravity of the responsibility and the significance of the Reed family's role. The underground facility would be secured with updated technology and officially designated as a research annex under Joint Reed Family and Division 7 management. A new structure would be built to replace the historic barn, preserving its architectural character while incorporating state-of-the-art security features and research capabilities disguised within traditional agricultural design. The trust fund would be formally transferred to Reed family control, with tax considerations and management structures that protected both their financial interests and appropriate governmental oversight. Most significantly, Jackson and future Reed custodians would receive appropriate security clearance and scientific training to participate meaningfully in decisions regarding illumination technology applications and potential public implementations. In essence, the director summarized as they reviewed the final provisions, "We are formalizing what has always been the underlying reality, that the Reed family are not merely hosts for this facility, but essential partners in its purpose." Jackson felt the weight of generations as he signed the documents, his signature joining those of his great-grandfather and grandfather in accepting a responsibility that transcended conventional understanding. As he completed the final page, the director extended his hand in a gesture that seemed to bridge institutional authority and personal respect. Your family's commitment has helped safeguard technology that could have changed the world prematurely, for better or worse," he said, his formal demeanor softening slightly. "That contribution deserves recognition beyond what's officially recorded." As the government representatives prepared to depart, Dr. Winters lingered briefly, her professional composure giving way to a more personal observation. "When I was a child, my mother would bring me to a lookout point where we could observe this farm from a distance," she shared unexpectedly. "She would tell me, 'Remember that appearances can be deceiving. What looks like an ordinary farm may be where humanity's future is being carefully tended.' I didn't understand then, but I do now." With those parting words, the Division 7 representatives departed, leaving the Reed family to absorb the extraordinary transformation of their circumstances. Where just days before they had faced financial ruin and the loss of their agricultural heritage, they now stood as recognized custodians of technology with world-changing potential, their farm's future secured for generations. As twilight settled over Whisper Creek, Jackson walked the boundaries of his property, land that had been in his family for 7 generations, now revealed as something far more significant than even he had realized. The collapsed barn would be rebuilt, the farm's operations would continue, but with a deeper purpose that aligned perfectly with the Reed family's long-standing commitment to responsible stewardship. "You look like a man who's made peace with something," Rebecca observed, joining him as he stood looking out over fields gilded by the setting sun. "I'm thinking about all the Reeds who carried this responsibility without recognition," he replied, slipping his arm around her waist. "How they balanced ordinary farming life with extraordinary knowledge. Not so different from what we'll be doing," she pointed out, "just with more awareness of the full picture." Jackson nodded, watching Ethan in the distance, already examining the temporary structures with newfound purpose, his commitment to the family legacy visibly renewed. The storm that had destroyed their historic barn had ultimately revealed a foundation far deeper and more significant than timbers and stonework, a foundation of purpose and responsibility that connected generations of Reeds in service to something beyond themselves. "We've been given an opportunity to do something truly meaningful," he said quietly. "Not just preserving a family farm, but helping shape how potentially world-changing technology enters society." Rebecca smiled, her practical nature finding solid ground even in these extraordinary circumstances. "The Reeds have always been good at knowing when to plant, when to harvest, and when to let fields lie fallow. Maybe that wisdom applies to more than just agriculture." As darkness fell over Whisper Creek Farm, Jackson Reed understood that while the barn his ancestors had built was gone, the legacy it had concealed remained stronger than ever. A legacy now consciously embraced by a new generation, prepared to continue the careful stewardship of both land and extraordinary knowledge for years to come. 5 months after the storm that changed everything, Whisper Creek Farm was transformed in ways both visible and profound. Where the historic octagonal barn had stood for nearly 2 centuries, a new structure now rose against the western Pennsylvania sky, identical in outward appearance to honor the original architecture, but incorporating technological innovations hidden seamlessly within its traditional design. Jackson Reed stood watching the final external touches being applied to the barn's distinctive cupola, marveling at how thoroughly the construction team had recreated his family's historic landmark. while concealing its extraordinary new purpose. To casual observers and neighbors, it appeared to be nothing more than a faithful, if remarkably swift, rebuilding of a beloved local landmark. Only those with clearance knew that beneath its traditional wooden siding and handcrafted beams lay one of the most sophisticated research facilities in the country. "They've matched the original red perfectly," observed Olivia, who had returned from Cornell University once she learned of the barn's destruction. Initially devastated by the loss of their family landmark, she had quickly become an enthusiastic participant in their new reality once Jackson and Rebecca had received authorization to include her in the inner circle of knowledge. Her agricultural economics background had proven unexpectedly valuable in the complex discussions about implementing illumination technologies in sustainable farming practices. "The Historical Society is already calling it a masterpiece of preservation," Jackson replied with a hint of irony that only his daughter would understand. If Bernard Whitman, the enthusiastic Historical Society president, knew what actually existed beneath the picturesque exterior, he'd likely need smelling salts to recover from the shock. A silver SUV turned into the long driveway, its government plates now a familiar sight at Whisper Creek. Dr. Winters had become a regular presence during the reconstruction, overseeing the delicate balance between security requirements and maintaining the farm's authentic agricultural character. Despite her initially intimidating governmental authority, the family had come to respect her genuine commitment to both the technology's protection and the Reed family's historical role. "The director is with her," Olivia noted, recognizing the distinguished passenger. "Must be important if he's making a personal visit." Jackson nodded, straightening his posture instinctively. Despite the increasingly collaborative relationship with Division 7, the director's presence still carried an unmistakable gravity. His visits were reserved for significant developments or decisions regarding the illumination technology. "Let's head inside," Jackson suggested. "Your mother and Ethan should be part of whatever this is." The farmhouse kitchen had become the unlikely nexus where agricultural tradition and cutting-edge scientific oversight regularly converged. Rebecca was reviewing veterinary charts at the table, while Ethan worked on his laptop, developing specialized software that would help monitor environmental conditions around the farm for signs of any anomalous energy signatures, a project that merged his technological aptitude with the family's new responsibilities. Dr. Winters entered with characteristic efficiency, the director following with more measured steps. After exchanging greetings that had grown less formal over the months of collaboration, they settled around the kitchen table, a setting whose homey practicality stood in strange contrast to the often extraordinary topics discussed there. "The reconstruction has progressed exceptionally well," the director began, accepting coffee from Rebecca with a polite nod. "Your contractor management has been impressive, particularly in maintaining security protocols while using local workforce." "People around here respect privacy," Jackson explained. "When we said certain areas were off-limits due to historical preservation requirements, nobody questioned it. Being good neighbors means not prying too deeply." The director smiled slightly. A perspective Division 7 could occasionally benefit from adopting. He set down his coffee cup and shifted to a more formal posture. "However, today's visit concerns the next phase of our arrangement. The facility is nearly operational, which means decisions about implementation priorities can no longer be theoretical. Dr. Winters opened a sleek tablet, projecting images onto the kitchen wall, an incongruous display of advanced technology against the farmhouse's weathered wainscoting. The display showed technical schematics alongside agricultural data specific to Whisper Creek's operations. "As you know," she explained, "previous generations of reeds implemented limited applications of illumination technology in agricultural contexts. Soil enhancement processes, localized weather stabilization, crop resilience factors. These implementations were deliberately subtle, maintaining both security and the farm's reputation for excellence without attracting undue attention." Jackson nodded, now understanding the source of his family's agricultural innovations that neighboring farms had never quite managed to replicate. His grandfather's seemingly intuitive growing techniques had actually incorporated principles derived from the revolutionary technology beneath their barn. "What we're proposing," the director continued, "is a carefully structured expansion of these implementations, still within agricultural contexts, but with more comprehensive monitoring to evaluate broader application potential." Ethan leaned forward, the technical aspects engaging his analytical mind. "You're talking about using Whisper Creek as a controlled testing environment for larger-scale applications." "Precisely," Dr. Winters confirmed. "The original Project Illumination researchers always intended a gradual, generational implementation approach. Your family has successfully managed the first phases over 7 decades. The time has come to consider next steps." What followed was a detailed presentation of proposed implementations, enhanced soil regeneration systems that could potentially address depleted agricultural lands, water purification methods that operated on molecular restructuring principles, and crop varieties with unprecedented environmental resilience. Each application represented revolutionary potential while remaining outwardly consistent with conventional agricultural innovation. "These would transform farming practices worldwide," Olivia noted, her agricultural economics training immediately grasping the implications. "The impact on food security alone would be extraordinary." "Which is precisely why testing must occur in controlled environments first," the director emphasized. "Technological revolutions introduced too rapidly or without sufficient understanding of systemic impacts often create more problems than they solve. Your great-grandfather understood this principle deeply." Jackson studied the proposals, considering them with the practical perspective that had guided generations of reed farmers. These implementations would essentially make Whisper Creek a working laboratory for agricultural applications of illumination technology, he observed, but still operating as a productive farm. That balance between research and practical implementation has always been the Reed contribution to this project, Dr. Winters noted. Laboratory scientists understand theoretical principles, but applying them successfully in living systems requires a different kind of wisdom. Rebecca, who had been thoughtfully silent, finally spoke. "This goes well beyond our original understanding of the custodial role. You're asking us to become active participants in expanding illumination applications, not just protecting the existing technology." "Yes," the director acknowledged without hesitation. "The passive custodial phase has served its purpose. The world faces unprecedented challenges: climate instability, resource depletion, food security concerns that certain illumination technologies could help address. but implementation requires exactly the kind of practical wisdom your family has demonstrated across generations. The proposition hung in the air, a transformative expansion of the Reed family's role that would move them from guardians of historical secrets to architects of potential global innovations. The responsibility was as daunting as it was extraordinary. "We would need time to consider this," Jackson finally said, looking to his family for confirmation. "And we'd need complete transparency about potential risks, not just benefits." "Of course," the director agreed, his expression suggesting he had expected nothing less. "The full technical assessment reports are included in your secure access files. Dr. Chen from our scientific division is available for consultations regarding specific implementation questions." He rose from the table with characteristic formality. "I recognize this represents a significant evolution of your family's involvement. Take whatever time you need to consider it properly." After the Division 7 representatives departed, promising to return in a week for their response, the Reed family remained gathered around the kitchen table, the projected images still illuminating the wall with tantalizing possibilities and sobering responsibilities. "They're asking us to help determine how potentially world-changing technology enters society," Ethan summarized, his expression a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "That's a moral responsibility as much as a technical one." Olivia nodded in agreement. "My sustainability professors at Cornell would have ethical meltdowns trying to process this. The potential benefits are extraordinary, but so are the possible unintended consequences." "Which is precisely why they want farmers involved," Rebecca observed with characteristic insight. "Academic scientists and government officials think differently than people who work directly with natural systems. We understand there are no perfect solutions, only balanced approaches." Jackson rose and moved to the window, looking out over the fields his family had tended for generations. The land appeared unchanged. Winter-dormant fields, waiting for spring planting, woodlots standing stark against the grey February sky. Yet everything about their relationship to it had transformed. "Our family has always seen farming as a responsibility to both the land and future generations," he said thoughtfully. "Maybe this is just an extension of that same principle, using the tools we've been entrusted with to address challenges, rather than simply preserving them for some future time." The discussion continued late into the evening, examining technical details, ethical considerations, and practical implications of accepting this expanded role. By morning, they had reached a tentative consensus. They would move forward with the proposed implementations, but with additional conditions ensuring Reed family oversight of how results would be evaluated and applied beyond Whisper Creek's boundaries. When the director returned the following week, he received their decision with what appeared to be genuine approval. "Your conditions demonstrate exactly the perspective we value in the Reed partnership," he acknowledged. "Balancing innovation with caution, progress with responsibility." Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it the first practical implementations of the expanded project. To neighboring farmers, Whisper Creek's operations appeared largely unchanged, perhaps employing some new conservation techniques, but nothing that wouldn't fit within the farm's long-standing reputation for progressive agricultural practices. Behind this carefully maintained appearance of normalcy, however, the first controlled applications of illumination technology were being systematically implemented and monitored. soil regeneration systems based on molecular restructuring principles were installed in test plots, their effects carefully measured against control areas. Specialized crop varieties developed using insights from the illumination research were planted in designated fields, while water management systems incorporating principles that seemed to defy conventional physics were discreetly integrated into the farm's irrigation infrastructure. Ethan developed monitoring systems that tracked every variable across the farm's operations, creating a comprehensive data picture that would allow them to identify both intended effects and potential anomalies. Olivia, who had decided to complete her final semester remotely, applied her agricultural economics training to analyze how these innovations might eventually scale to address broader food security challenges. Rebecca's veterinary expertise proved unexpectedly valuable in assessing biological impacts beyond plant systems. Throughout this transformation, Jackson remained the practical center of the operation, the farmer whose generations of experience provided context and grounding for potentially revolutionary changes. When theoretical applications proved impractical in actual field conditions, it was typically Jackson who identified workable modifications. When monitoring revealed unexpected interactions between illumination-derived systems and natural processes, his lifelong observation of ecological relationships often suggested explanations that the scientific team hadn't considered. By midsummer, the results were becoming clear, and they were remarkable. Test plots treated with the illumination-derived soil regeneration system showed unprecedented recovery rates, with depleted areas returning to full productivity in weeks rather than years. Specialized crop varieties demonstrated resistance to both drought and excessive rainfall, adapting to weather conditions that would have devastated conventional plantings. The water management system reduced irrigation requirements by nearly 60%, while improving soil moisture distribution throughout the root zones. The data confirms what we're seeing in the fields, Dr. Chen reported during one of the weekly assessment meetings, now held in a secure room within the reconstructed barn. These applications are achieving sustainability metrics that conventional agricultural science considers theoretically impossible. The question becomes how we move forward from here, Dr. Winters added, directing her comment primarily to Jackson and his family. These results justify consideration of broader implementation, but the transition from controlled testing to wider application requires careful planning. The conversation that followed reflected the extraordinary evolution of the Reed family's role. Rather than merely responding to governmental directives, they were now equal partners in shaping implementation strategies for technology with potentially global implications. Jackson's practical farming wisdom, Ethan's technological insight, Olivia's economic analysis, and Rebecca's biological expertise all contributed to a comprehensive approach that balanced innovation with responsible stewardship. What we're proposing, Jackson explained as they finalized their recommendations, is a phased implementation through agricultural extension partnerships. Each application would be introduced as an experimental technique through existing university programs, allowing for controlled adoption while maintaining appropriate monitoring. The agricultural extension model provides perfect cover, Olivia added. Farmers are used to university researchers testing new approaches on cooperative farms. It allows for implementation without raising questions about the technology's origins. The director, who had joined them for this crucial discussion, nodded with approval. This approach honors the original intention of generational implementation while addressing contemporary needs. The Reed perspective continues to provide balance to what might otherwise become a purely technical process. As autumn approached, bringing with it Whisper Creek's first harvest under the new implementation protocols, the results exceeded even the most optimistic projections. Crop yields in the test areas had increased by over 40% while using significantly fewer inputs. Soil health metrics showed improvements that would normally take decades to achieve through conventional regenerative practices. Most remarkably, areas surrounding the implementation zones showed positive spillover effects, suggesting beneficial influences extending beyond the direct application sites. We're seeing ecosystem-wide improvements, Rebecca reported after analyzing comprehensive biological surveys. Beneficial insect populations, soil microbiome diversity, even bird populations in adjacent woodlots, all showing positive trends correlating with the implementation zones. These results catalyze the next phase of their carefully structured plan. Through seemingly routine agricultural extension partnerships, the first illumination-derived techniques began appearing on selected farms across Pennsylvania and neighboring states. Presented as experimental sustainable farming practices developed at Whisper Creek, these implementations allowed for broader testing while maintaining security around their true origins. By the following spring, preliminary data from these partner farms confirmed the results observed at Whisper Creek. Depleted soils were returning to productivity. Water efficiency metrics were transforming irrigation practices. Crop resilience was improving outcomes, even in areas with challenging growing conditions. While the partner farmers attributed these results to clever agricultural innovation rather than revolutionary technology, the impact on food production capacity was becoming clear. We're seeing the first measurable impacts at regional scale, Olivia reported during a family discussion in the farmhouse kitchen. Still, their preferred setting for the most important conversations despite the sophisticated facilities now available in the rebuilt barn. Food insecurity metrics in implementation regions have decreased 11% in just one growing season. And we've maintained balanced implementation, Ethan added, showing monitoring data on his laptop. No ecosystem disruptions, no unintended consequences in adjacent systems. The phased approach is working exactly as intended. Jackson, who had been quietly listening to his children's reports, finally spoke with the measured wisdom that had guided their entire approach. What matters most isn't just the technology itself, but how it enters society, with respect for natural systems, consideration of broader impacts, and a genuine commitment to addressing needs rather than creating dependencies. He smiled slightly. Essentially the same principles that have guided good farming for generations. Rebecca reached across the table to take his hand. Who would have thought that what the world needed most wasn't just revolutionary technology, but farmers' perspective on how to implement it wisely? As Whisper Creek Farm entered its third year of expanded operations, its influence extended far beyond its boundaries in ways both visible and hidden. Officially, it had become recognized as a leading sustainable agriculture research operation, hosting visitors from agricultural programs worldwide interested in its innovative techniques. Behind this public identity, it continued its crucial role as the central implementation site for carefully managed illumination technology applications. The trust fund that had initially shocked the Reed family with its $27 million balance had grown substantially as limited commercial applications of illumination-derived technologies began generating returns. However, true to the values that had guided their approach from the beginning, the family directed significant portions of these funds toward establishing what appeared to be a conventional agricultural foundation dedicated to supporting sustainable farming practices globally. This foundation, known simply as Reed Agricultural Innovations, provided the perfect mechanism for introducing selected illumination-derived technologies in regions facing critical food security challenges. Working through established agricultural development organizations, the foundation funded implementation projects that appeared to be conventional sustainable farming initiatives, while incorporating carefully controlled applications of the revolutionary technology. The results in these implementation regions proved even more significant than those observed domestically. Areas facing severe soil degradation showed remarkable recovery. Regions struggling with water scarcity developed resilient production systems despite limited resources. Communities that had faced chronic food insecurity began achieving stable production levels that promised long-term security. The satellite data confirms what the ground reports are telling us, Ethan announced, during one of their regular assessment meetings, displaying global monitoring results. Implementation regions are showing ecosystem recovery rates that defy conventional projections. It's working, Dad. And it's working because we're implementing at appropriate scales with local participation, Jackson emphasized, the principle he had insisted upon from the beginning. Not imposing technological solutions, but integrating them with existing knowledge and practices. This balanced approach had impressed even the most security-conscious elements of Division 7. Rather than creating disruptive technological leaps that might trigger geopolitical instability or economic displacement, the Reed implementation model was demonstrating how revolutionary technology could enter society organically, addressing critical needs without creating new problems in the process. Your family has fundamentally changed our understanding of technology implementation, the director acknowledged during a private conversation with Jackson. For decades, we focused primarily on the security risks of premature disclosure. Your approach has demonstrated that how technology enters society is as important as the technology itself. 3 years after the storm that had revealed Whisper, Greek's extraordinary secret, Jackson stood on the same hilltop where generations of Reeds had surveyed their land. The farm appeared remarkably unchanged at first glance. Fields laid out in the same patterns, the rebuilt barn standing proudly in its historical location, seasonal activities proceeding with agricultural predictability. Yet, hidden within this apparent continuity was transformation of profound significance. Below ground, the expanded illumination facility now served as the coordination center for implementations spanning multiple continents. Throughout the fields, monitoring systems tracked data that informed global application strategies. Within the reconstructed barn, researchers from selected partner organizations collaborated on adapting technologies for diverse environmental conditions worldwide. Most significantly, the Reed family itself had transformed, from farmers fighting to preserve a threatened heritage to stewards of technology with the potential to address humanity's most pressing challenges. Each family member had found unique purpose within this expanded role, Jackson providing the practical wisdom that kept implementations grounded in reality. Rebecca ensuring biological systems remained in balance. Ethan developing the monitoring frameworks essential for responsible scaling. And Olivia designing economic models that allowed innovations to benefit those most in need. "I've been thinking about something my great-grandfather wrote," Jackson told his family as they gathered that evening on the farmhouse porch, watching fireflies rise over fields that now harbored innovations beyond what anyone outside their circle could comprehend. He said that to safeguard extraordinary knowledge until humanity's wisdom catches up with its cleverness is perhaps the greatest service one can render future generations. "He was right about the safeguarding part," Ethan acknowledged, "but I think what we're doing now is even more important, helping ensure that when this technology does enter society more fully, it does so in ways that actually address human needs rather than creating new problems." Olivia nodded in agreement. "The Foundation projects are showing that it's possible to implement revolutionary technology without disrupting the social and economic systems people depend on. That's as important as the technology itself. And we're doing it all while still being farmers," Rebecca added with a smile. "Still working with the seasons, still responding to weather and soil conditions, still getting our hands dirty, just with some extraordinary tools our ancestors couldn't have imagined." Jackson looked out over the land his family had tended for 7 generations, land that now served as the nexus for innovation with truly global implications. The historic barn that had hidden the illumination facility for decades was gone, replaced by a structure that honored its appearance while embracing its expanded purpose. Similarly, Whisper Creek Farm maintained its agricultural identity while evolving to meet challenges its founders could never have anticipated. "I think that's why the Reed family was chosen for this responsibility in the first place," he said, reflectively. "Farming teaches you to respect what came before, while constantly adapting to what's changing, to value tradition while embracing innovation when it serves a genuine purpose, to understand that meaningful progress happens one season at a time, not in sudden leaps that disrupt natural balances." As darkness settled over Whisper Creek Farm, lights became visible in the reconstructed barn where the night shift of researchers continued their work. In fields nearby, specialized monitoring equipment gathered data that would inform implementation strategies worldwide. From external appearance, it remained a working Pennsylvania farm, but one now at the center of a carefully managed technological revolution unfolding at nature's pace rather than humanity's impatience. The Reed family legacy had evolved far beyond what Jackson could have imagined when fighting to save their struggling farm. Yet in the most fundamental sense, it remained unchanged. A commitment to responsible stewardship, passed through generations, now expanded to encompass not just their land, but potentially transformative knowledge that could reshape humanity's relationship with the natural world. "Your great-grandfather would be proud," Rebecca said softly, reaching for Jackson's hand as they watched the stars emerge above their extraordinary ordinary farm. Not just that the technology was protected all these years, but how the Reed family is helping it enter the world. Jackson nodded, feeling the weight and privilege of his family's unique responsibility. The storm that had destroyed their historic barn had revealed foundations far deeper than timber and stone. A legacy of balancing innovation and wisdom that proved as relevant to revolutionary technology as it had always been to farming. Through choices made by generations of Reeds, that legacy now extended from their Pennsylvania fields to implementation sites worldwide, where illumination technology was quietly addressing challenges that had once seemed insurmountable. "We're still doing what the Reeds have always done," he reflected, watching the lights of the research facility glow within the traditional silhouette of the rebuilt barn. "Cultivating what matters, season by season, with patience and purpose." The scale has changed, but the principles haven't. In the distance, another vehicle turned into the farm's long driveway. Researchers arriving for the night shift, or perhaps government representatives with new implementation proposals to discuss. The rhythm of activity at Whisper Creek never truly ceased now, its role too significant to pause, even as darkness fell over its seemingly ordinary fields. Jackson Reed rose from his chair on the farmhouse porch, ready to meet whatever new developments awaited. A farmer standing at the intersection of ancient agricultural wisdom and revolutionary technology, helping ensure that both served humanity's authentic needs rather than merely its momentary desires. The barn that had collapsed during that transformative storm had taken with it one era of the Reed family legacy. But the foundations revealed beneath it had opened another, one with the potential to extend the principles of responsible stewardship far beyond the boundaries of their Pennsylvania farm to address challenges facing all of humanity. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.